My name is Jonatan Almfjord, and this is In-Depth Conversations. Okay, so today we are welcoming Erik Persson to In-Depth Conversation. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you.
So you are a philosopher here at Lund University and at the Department of Philosophy, to be more specific.
That's right, yes.
And in practical philosophy, correct?
That's right, yes, that's what it's called.
Great. And let's see, how about the title again? Are you an associate professor or a reader?
That's the same thing, I understand.
Really?
This titles is not my specialty at all.
Okay.
But as I have understood it, reader is the British English term, and associate professor is the American English term. And the university, I think, officially uses the British English term, but I think most people use the American English term because it's more common, easier to understand.
Right, right.
But that's only how I understood it. That may be totally wrong.
Okay. That's new information to me. Today we learned, I suppose. Let's hear it all about the interesting things that you are researching. You are researching about ethics, and you are researching about space and AI and aliens and lots of funny things. So, let's start at the beginning. When did you decide I want to become an academic researcher? Was that always your life dream?
No, not at all. I grew up in a working class family, way out in the middle of nowhere, and there was like no one in the village or in the family that had ever been to a university. So, but I like to read, and I was reading, and then eventually I became an academic philosopher.
Did you start out with reading like heavy books considering your age? Like a very, very nerdy philosophy stuff at a super young age, or
heavy books, yes, but not nerdy philosophy stuff. Okay. Actually, when I was in high school, last year of high school, in the science program, you had to choose between philosophy and psychology. And I thought psychology sounded really boring, and I had never really. I didn't really know what philosophy was about. We'd never talked about philosophy in school. So I thought, I'll try that. Okay. And it turned out our philosophy teacher was really good. And I thought it was really interesting, so I continued.
That's nice. So you took a leap of faith, I guess, into the unknown. You knew something about psychology. It sounded boring. Yeah. I would disagree, since I'm studying psychology. Yeah, but anyway.
Well, that was my prejudice at the time. I had never studied psychology either. It just sounded more boring.
Yeah. That's cool. But what about other fields than the humanities? Were you ever into, like, I don't know, technical stuff, or?
Yeah, I studied a lot of things at university.
Okay.
I like to be multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, and I've studied lots of environmental stuff, and I studied physics, and I studied astronomy. I studied lots of different things because it's fun to learn about new things.
Yeah, I agree, for sure. All right, so about I have read a long list of all the topics that you are studying, reading about, researching, etc. It said stuff like artificial intelligence and I was about to say astrology, but more like no. Astro stuff. There I say.
Astro stuff.
Yeah.
Space in general. Yes, astronomy, astrobiology, but also. Space research from a philosophy perspective. Yes.
Yeah. Is it a common is the term denominator that you always no matter what you're researching, it's always about ethics, or that's not true?
Not always, no. But I am a practical philosopher, and ethics is an important part, a big part of practical philosophy. My PhD thesis was about ethics and value theory.
Yeah, right.
So it's been a lot of ethics, but also philosophy of language and philosophy of science and other stuff.
Right.
I don't like to be stuck in one area.
Yeah, so it seems. But that's a good fun. Okay, so I have this question, which I guess is naive, but since I myself have very little experience in philosophy and ethics and stuff, how do you study ethics in, like, I mean, I'm very used to the possibly natural sciences kind of way, the empirical thing, observing stuff, making manipulations and stuff. How to do that when it comes to ethics? It seems diffuse to me.
Well, ethics is not an empirical science.
Okay.
Of course, you can study like the norms of the society or something empirically, but that's not ethics. It's one thing how people behave and what kind of rules they have and what kind of rules are prevalent in the society. But when you study ethics, you study the principles, and it's not empirical science. It's more like math in that particular sense. It's not math, but in the sense that if you're a mathematician, you can say that like 3 unicorns plus 2 unicorns is 5 unicorns, and whether unicorns exist or not is completely irrelevant, right? And if you're a philosopher studying ethics, how people actually behave is completely irrelevant. Ethics is about how we should behave. It's about finding the ideal, and ethics has been defined differently through the ages, from like the ancient Greeks when philosophy were very wide and ethics was also very wide. It was about finding rules for living. In some cases, rules for living a happy life, a good life, and for a long time it's been about finding and living after the rules of a certain divinity, for instance. Today, I would say, at least in applied ethics, ethics is more about how to handle the fact that your decisions, your actions affect others in ways that are important to them. Right. How do you handle that? That's basically the kind of ethics that I'm interested in, and the kind of ethics that I'm studying.
Right. So is it, again, I'm improvising here, but is it fair to say that ethics is more of a normative field of study than a descriptive?
It's definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good. Okay. So.
It's not about what is. It's about what should be.
Yeah. Right. That's great. That makes sense, actually, in a lot of ways. I have a lot of new stuff to read about after this conversation. All right, so you as a researcher, you have published a lot of articles and like book chapters and stuff. And I had a look through the whole list of things, and I looked at a few summaries, and one of the things that stood out to me was a paper that, I don't remember the title, but I have it written down. It was called, Synthetic Life and the Value of Life, from 2021. And since it had the term the value of life, which I totally love, then is this a paper that you could perhaps tell me a little more about? I'm super curious.
Sure, yes. So the question is, when we learn to create life,
right,
ourselves, not in the normal way, right? But create life like in the lab. What will that do to the value of life? Will it have like the effect that if we learn to make life at will, does that mean that life will have less value? So that's what I was looking into. I was looking at different arguments for that from the literature, and I didn't find any of these arguments really holding up. I think that it might be that the original life, the if I can use the term natural life that I don't really like, but anyway, may be considered more valuable than the created life. Just like natural things somehow often is assigned higher value than things that are created. Not always though. So that may be the case, but the fact that we learn, if we ever do, learn to create life will, I think, at least that was my conclusion in that paper, will not be affected by that.
Right. So again, this can hardly be an empirical study. It's more that you have decided on doing on pursuing this question, and then you look up existing theories and interesting questions, and then you. Yeah, I put it into stupid words, but then you sit in your chambers and you think a lot about it.
That's exactly
and you
what's
connect
happening.
The dots, etc., etc.
Yes.
Okay.
When writing the methods section about philosophy, that's really hard, because if you do empirical science, it's pretty straightforward. You write about your experiments or your observations and how you do that. But in philosophy, it can be, you read a lot and you think. That's it. So the method section can be pretty short.
Yeah. I've thought about this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, but about, I guess you could, I won't, but you could have a long discussion about the religious opinions on creation of life, etc. But again, that's another discussion.
And that's not something I have been involved in studying.
Yeah, for sure. But is there perhaps reason to dive a bit into the definition of the term life? What's you mentioned you don't like the term natural life. So how can we consider? Yeah, let's start at what is life.
First of all, if we take a step back, you're talking about natural. The reason I don't like to use the term is that there are many different definitions of it, and it's a very loaded term, and I think it's not very informative.
Right.
So I prefer to now I did, but I prefer not to use it, because it tends to complicate things unnecessarily and to invoke feelings that maybe I didn't intend to use. So life, yes, life is very exciting. It's something that almost everyone is interested in, and what is weird is that there is no definition that everyone agrees on.
Okay, that seems weird.
That seems weird, doesn't it? And of course, if it's weird, then it's interesting to a philosopher.
Yeah, for sure.
And since I've been working quite a lot with philosophy of space exploration and astrobiology, that's something that tends to turn up all the time. The question of what is life really? If you're looking for life on other planets, on other worlds, it's kind of useful to have a definition of life, at least a tentative one to start with.
Yeah.
Because you need to know where to look, which instruments to use, and it's hard if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And in the end, you need to decide, did we find it or not?
Yeah.
And again, it will be useful to know what life is, right? And same thing if you're working with synthetic biology and want to create life in the lab, or if you work with AI and robots and try to make them more lifelike.
Yeah.
So in all these situations, it helps a lot if you know what life is. Probably more if you do synthetic biology or astrobiology than if you just do biology, because most biologists, they deal with life as we know it.
Yeah.
So if you're studying a particular kind of tree or a particular mammal or something, it's pretty clear that they are alive. So most biologists don't have to think about this on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But if you do astrobiology, the very aim of astrobiology is to understand life. The definition of astrobiology is the interdisciplinary study of the origin and the distribution and evolution and future of life in the universe. So astrobiology is like per definition about understanding life and especially the border conditions of life. So when you talk to astrobiologists and when you work with astrobiology from a philosophical point of view, this question, what is life, you can't really get around it somehow. And since there are so many different attempts to define it, and still we have not managed to find like the ultimate answer. That's an interesting challenge for a philosopher.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we just kind of debunked the whole field of biology. Like we talk about, or they talk about living stuff, but they don't even know what living stuff is. They just assume it, perhaps.
But in most cases, it's pretty uncontroversial.
Okay.
I mean, I think almost every one of us has some kind of intuitive understanding of what life is.
Yeah, I
most
agree.
of us can, in most everyday situations, distinguish between life and non-life. I think it would be very rare to find a person who get into this room and say, I don't know if the table is alive, I don't know if you're alive. So in most cases it's easy. But there are cases, even on our planet, that are like difficult cases, like virus.
Yeah.
Virus is a controversial cases. Some claim that virus is alive, some claim it isn't. Prions is kind of similar, and some claim that they have created life in the computer, and that's obviously controversial. So there are controversial cases, but if we talk about extraterrestrial life, life as we don't know it, life that will probably be very different from Earth, then it suddenly becomes a very concrete and very very important thing.
Right.
And much more difficult.
Yeah. So, as soon as you start talking about astrobiology, is the correct term? Yeah. Then I keep thinking of. I have been watching a lot of. Yeah, I started with Star Wars, to be honest, but I'm watching a lot of Star Trek recently. And in Star Trek, those are older movies than the Star Wars movies, or the first ones, either way. Yeah, either case. A lot of the aliens, the non-humans in Star Trek, look like humans, but they have like additional makeup.
Yeah.
And that perhaps it was the case that they didn't have more advanced special effects, but sometimes it's quite comical. I remember one space animal that was a dog in a costume, like it had additional fur, and this is a space dog, and I'm like, okay. But I suppose that what the fictional, I'm rambling on, but like the fictional team of characters in Star Trek, they are conducting practical astrobiology. Could you say something like that? They are exploring new species and new.
Yeah, they are conducting kind of astrobiology that is difficult today because they have kind of technology that we don't have.
Yeah.
Today, astrobiology is a lot about looking at extremophiles on planet Earth to understand the border conditions for life. It's also to a certain extent a matter of sending landers to other worlds in our primarily Mars in our solar system to understand like the chemical and geological properties of these worlds and get some kind of understanding if it's life would be possible there now or previously, and also maybe possibly eventually, if we are really lucky, find some fossilized life, or if we are extremely lucky, finding some microbes. Which is super interesting if you're an astrobiologist, but maybe wouldn't be such good TV, right?
Okay, sure. Yeah, Star Trek is
Yes. Can I ask something?
For sure.
How would you know that you found life without comparing it to life on Earth? Like, without using Earth life as reference? or like you said, the borders of life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, and that's something that astrobiology and the philosophy of astrobiology is grappling with. So you need some kind of definition, but it will necessarily be biased because we only have Earth life to work from, right? It's sometimes called the n=1 problem. We only have one instance because, well, there are different kinds of life on Earth, but all life on Earth is related. We are all carbon-based. We all have some kind of ancestor, common ancestor, if you go far enough back in time. So it's still like one life form, and life somewhere else can be very, very different. It's probably very different, but still, if we want to call it life, there must be something, right, that we have in common with that life. And what is that? And that is hard because life is evolving.
Yeah.
So how do you find something, some property that all life is sharing in a system that is constantly changing?
So I feel like I need to not push back, but like push even further. Considering all this that you've just said, is there really nothing that, I mean, surely there must be. What's the best definition that we have, the working definition? I mean, how do I even know that you're alive? I mean, I intuitively I do, but I'm. Is it more like I remember one guest we had here in the conversation mentioned the term folk concept as compared to like scientifical term, and that was quite interesting. Could you say that like the folk concept of life is rather not defined, but like everyone accepts it, but when it comes to science, it's like it all fails to it's too complex, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What's the folk concept of life? I don't know really. I guess, I mean, there are certain properties that tend to come up, like metabolism, and the ability to propagate, and being organic, carbon based, right? But I don't know if you would call them a folk concept, but still there are definitely some really good suggestions in the sense that we're talking about properties that are shared by all or most life on our planet.
Right.
But there are always complications. Like the maybe most common property that is mentioned, that propagation. Right? Life propagates itself.
Yeah.
Which is great. It's just that not all life propagates.
Right.
A lot of
do
life.
we mean physically propagate, or do we mean propagate evolutionary, like procreating, or
Procreating? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, not every living being propagates. You can take like mule. No mule procreates,
yeah,
right?
I get that.
But it would be very weird to say that they're not alive.
Yeah, for sure.
And we have similar problems with all of these properties that are really good suggestions. They are very strongly associated with life, but there's always something wrong with them, and that is really annoying.
Yeah.
Right. Some would say that evolution, because evolution is very strongly associated with life. It's hard to think about one without another. There are people who talk about chemical evolution as a predecessor to biological evolution. So there was a chemical evolution before it was life.
Yeah.
And then it's of course hard to say, so where do we draw the line between chemistry and life? But there are also other problems with evolution, and the most difficult one, I would say, is that what's evolving? What is evolving?
Do you ask me?
Yes.
Oh, now I get nervous.
Are you evolving?
Yeah, right. On an individual level, so, intuitively, I feel like no, it's about changes between generations.
Yeah.
But of course, I changed during my lifetime.
But that's not evolution.
That's not evolution, right?
Yes. So that's the problem. Evolution is something that happens on a population level.
Okay.
Individuals change, hopefully, during the lifetime, right? And individuals live and die, and some propagate and some don't, and that changes the distribution of genetic material in the population in the next generation. That's how populations evolve. But if we say that evolution is like a necessary property for being alive, that means that only populations are alive.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So that's a big problem, right?
So you can't claim, for example, that this person or that person in itself, like it is evolute. Yeah, like you just said, I am changing over the course of my life, but I am not. How to even phrase that? I am not experiencing evolution myself, perhaps.
Well, you're not evolving.
Yeah, right. I'm not evolving.
Yeah, we are not evolving. Only the species is evolving.
That's cool. That feels almost wrong for me to say we are not evolving, but I get what you mean, considering what you just said.
And there's also a practical problem. If we go to, let's say, Mars or Europa or Enceladus and look for life, and evolution is a necessary property. That means even if we find something, we may have to wait for a long time before we can say that it's alive. We need to. It will not even be enough to find like one organism. We need to find a whole population, and we need to wait for a long time to see if it evolves. This is very impractical. So even evolution, that's probably the concept that is most strongly associated with life, is problematic from the point of view of defining life.
Wow, that's so interesting, though. I could imagine a kind of comical situation in which scientists, perhaps yourself or others, do find something on a distant planet, and the general public accept it. This is life, but science is more like, wait, we have to wait for the evolutionary process or whatever. So it kind of becomes a clash between those. That would be super interesting. Could make for a good comedy film. Meanwhile,
yeah. So life is complicated, but there are different approaches to trying to do this. And the most common approach is the classical one. You make a list of properties, and you say that to be life, you need to fulfill all the properties on this list. And if you do, then it's life.
Yeah, sure.
But agreeing on what should be on the list, that's really difficult.
Yeah, of course.
But there are other approaches to doing this, and I've been working on together with a biologist, Erik on what's sometimes called a Wittgensteinian approach or a cluster theory approach, which means that Wittgenstein had this idea of language games, and he talked about what was sometimes called I forgot the word. We better cut this. So Wittgenstein was talking about family resemblance. So and he used that specifically about the word game, because game, it's really hard to define, and it seems that two phenomena that are both called games, and it makes good sense to call them games, but they don't seem to have anything really in common. So if we talk about a kid who are putting together a puzzle, that's a game.
Yes.
And if you look at the Olympics when they are competing, that's a game.
Yeah.
And those two don't seem to have a lot in common.
No, not really.
But it still makes sense to use the word game about them.
Yeah, I agree.
And the idea is that, well, you can make a cluster of properties that one of them fulfills, and you can make a cluster of properties that the other one fulfills, and there are other things that you call games that have a certain cluster of properties, and if you put all these things you call game on a list and their properties, there will be overlap of properties. But it may be that X and Y don't have any overlapping properties. But it could be that if you add Z, then there will be overlapping properties with Y and Z and X and Z.
Yeah.
So all together, there are some properties that are very strongly associated with life, like the ones we mentioned, like propagation and evolution and metabolism and whatever. And maybe we could use that to our advantage and say that, if you have this set of properties that are very closely associated with life, then you're alive. If you have that set of properties that is very closely associated with life, then you're alive. It may be that you find two things that we both can agree they're alive, even though they don't have any properties in common. But they have properties that overlap with other things we call alive. And that is an idea we have been toying with, and we're working a bit on that, and we use some machine learning to build algorithms that can identify clusters like this. We're still in the early days of this work, but we think that maybe something there. We are not sure, but we think it's worth a try.
Yeah, sure. So you said this was called a Wittgenstein approach?
It's a Wittgensteinian approach because it's making use of Wittgenstein's theory of family resemblance.
Right.
So we are not really doing this in the spirit of Wittgenstein.
Okay.
We are more taking his ideas and run with it in a different direction.
Okay, all right.
So it's a bit different, but we are inspired by his work.
Yeah, right.
And others have used similar ideas to define the term species, for instance.
Right.
So we're trying it on the term life.
Actually, you mentioned before a term that triggered something in my brain, machine learning. I want to talk about some robots as well, artificial intelligence and stuff. Actually, I could mention that I do some work at a science center here in Lund, which receives young school people, school kids.
Yeah, I'm there often with my kids.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and it's good fun. And my personal favorite is to sit and talk with kids about artificial intelligence and show them some robots, both pictures and actual robots and stuff. And I can hardly say that any of the kids have as deep philosophical understanding of anything as you perhaps do, but it's very interesting to talk with the children, and I do feel like one of the things I've learned is that when I talk to children or perhaps their parents, I often get very differing opinions and perhaps even fears, the robots are taking over the world kind of thing, from kids as compared to parents. And perhaps it's more that the kids are used to internet and the parents are not, etc. But yeah, perhaps that's a bad start. Let's start with is AI alive? No, that's a bad question. Let's start with something along those lines. How do you think about AI in general? That's a broad question, right?
Yeah, it's a very broad question. Yeah. So it's very philosophically interesting.
Yeah.
Many perspectives. It touches on questions what is intelligence.
Yeah.
But also obviously ethical issues with this. There are lots of ethical issues right now when machine learning and artificial intelligence is used for certain applications, and it's sometimes believed a bit naively that AI is completely free from bias. It's a machine, it's working very logically, no bias, but it's turned out that it's completely wrong. It's just as biased as we are. And the reason for that, of course, is that it's trained on data from us, and we are biased, so the bias is transferred to the machine. And there are lots of interesting ethical issues in this. That is very very sad, but it's very fascinating for a philosopher to work with. But of course, there is also the more long-term worries about like the existential risk of AI. What do we do when the machines become more intelligent than we are? How can we control them? How can we make sure that they do what's good for us? We tend to control the world right now. We are not the biggest or the strongest animals on the planet, but we still have unlimited power. Sometimes among philosophers talking about AIs, we mentioned the so-called gorilla problem. The gorillas are much bigger and stronger than we are. But their whole existence is totally dependent on us.
Right.
Which is scary, and we don't want to be in that relation to the AI.
Sure.
How do you handle that? How do you avoid these kinds of problems?
Remind me to ask all the children about that. The gorilla problem, is it?
Yes.
It reminds me of a psychological thing, the gorilla suit experiment, but that's a whole different story. Did you have a question?
Yes, can I ask a question? So, does it ever, because you've worked with animal ethics, can you relate that to how you could problematize ethics with AI? So if AI becomes conscious and we use them as our slaves, or as we do with animals today, right, abuse them and use them for our advantage, do you see ethical problems there if it's something that we've created?
Yes, definitely. Yes. So in this broad philosophical discussion about AI and ethics, one thing that is discussed is the question of AI rights. So when will AI reach such a level, and what kind of features are we talking about that means that we have to grant it a moral standing? I would say it's very common answer would be that when they're sentient, which means that when they have like a subjective perspective on the world. So they're conscious, and they also can feel, and they can experience things as being good or bad. That means, according to common definition in animal ethics, that means that they have interests. And therefore, they need to be considered ethically.
Right. But I mean, earlier in the discussion, we didn't even agree on what life is. So do we agree, or I mean, do science agree enough about what being sentient is in order to even have these discussions?
I would say enough. It's a difficult issue. It's made up by some difficult concepts like consciousness, which is not clear. Right. But this idea that it has to do with subjectivity in some sense, and the ability to subjectively experience things as positive or negative. That means that you have some kind of interest. That means that when I do things that affect you, then it will affect you not just in the objective sense, but also in a subjective sense from your perspective.
Right.
And that's something we call that you have an interest. And then suddenly it means that it matters to you how I treat you, and then ethics come into play. That's a common way of looking at it, and it comes from animal ethics, obviously. But a difficult thing is, how do you recognize sentience in a machine?
Yeah.
It's difficult enough if we talk about animals or other living things. Usually it's an analogy argument. You can say, well, they have the same kind of nervous systems as we do, and they tend to react to certain stimuli in the same sense as we do, and we are sentient, so probably they are too. If we are really strict, we can say that I cannot be totally sure that you're sentient.
Yeah.
So I have to assume that, well, you seem to have about the same kind of bodily structure, and you seem to react in the same way. If I step on your toe, you will probably say ouch or something like that. So you're probably sentient.
Yeah, I mean, I have different hair, I have different shirts, but
you have hair.
But it's but it's like it's good enough.
Close enough. Yeah. And the same thing with other animals. At least if we're talking about vertebrates. But if we talk about machines, how do you apply this thinking on machines?
Yeah.
There have been discussions about finding a Turing test for sentience.
Okay.
That can be used on machines.
Yeah. And just wait until humans start failing that test. That will be
true.
Quite interesting.
True. But that is a really interesting question. How do we know when a machine is sentient?
Yeah. And since it's a machine, let's see if I get these terms right, we're mostly talking about the software, right, rather than the hardware. I mean, I could, or let's say, it's more of an abstract connection between, I'm going to say it again, my soul and my body, as compared to a machine. Like, I could run this algorithm, these AI codes on this machine, but I could just as easily run it on my electrical fridge at home, or like a totally different machine. That surely must complicate the whole "is this a sentient being?" question. I mean, at least my body is framed in space, like it has its limits and stuff. But when we talk about machines, it could be like a laptop computer. It could also, we could make hardware that looks human or like animal-like, but it could also be just code bits floating around online, and it's not sure where is the body. Am I onto something, or am I totally not?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to animals, it's common to talk about embodiment.
Yeah.
So there is a very strong connection between your body and your mind, and they can probably not be separated.
Yeah.
There are some ideas saying that, well, in the future maybe we can upload our consciousness to a machine and live forever. But there's critique against that too. Will it be possible to talk about just an algorithm or a string of information as being sentient?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
That's a good answer. It feels wrong to me, but you're the expert here. So perhaps in the future, it feels so wrong. Why does it feel wrong?
If I'm an expert in anything here, it would be on the ethical implications, not on the software and hardware.
I got you.
That's not my specialty. But as I understand it, there are different opinions about the importance of embodiment, also when it comes to the issue of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a whole can of worms, it seems, if we start going down that rabbit hole can of worms, yeah.
Yeah, that's can of worms in rabbit hole.
Half-assed analogy. Okay, so let's wrap things up with the section in which I ask you briefly about how do you think the university is working? Like, in an ideal society, what would be the role in university? I mean, in a way, you have chosen to spend your time at or perhaps I shouldn't say at the university, in academia. You work in academia. Like, so why do you do that? Like, what do you hope that your workplace might contribute to society in large?
Yeah, and I think I may be different from many people in the humanities, but I think that humanities has a role to play in the society at large. I think a lot of the knowledge we produce here is valuable in its own right, and I think a lot of the process of producing knowledge is valuable in its own right.
Okay.
The search for knowledge has value in itself. And lots of the knowledge has value in itself, independently of what it's used for. But I also think, and this is maybe where I differ from many in the humanities, I also think that humanities has a great instrumental value.
Okay.
And that also goes for philosophy. And I think I spent most of my career trying to prove that.
Okay.
By using philosophical theories, philosophical methods to actually solve or at least clarify real problems that bother people outside of the ivory tower.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I'm working on a lot of ethics, but also theory of science issues having to do with other disciplines. Where they can come to good use.
Right. Yeah, that was fun. I think this is a good place to stop. So thank you very much for participating in this discussion.
Thank you very much.